Hey friends, welcome to episode 30 of the Way Too Indiecast. Today we're talking to filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer about his new film, The Look of Silence, the follow-up to his penetrating 2013 documentary, The Act of Killing. We're also honored to have a second guest on the show. Filmmaker Perry Blackshear is joining us to talk about his film, They Look Like People, a terrific genre movie about friendship and nightmares. And inspired by Perry's film, we're also going to be sharing our favorite bloodless horror scenes. Scenes that are totally terrifying, but don't use gore, blood, or guts to scare us shitless. Now, to be honest, I sort of flubbed the show intro during our initial recording with Perry and CJ, so what you're hearing now is me making up for that mistake. But now that I've recorded this much better intro that doesn't sound like garbage, I'm going to throw it back to our original conversation. I'm your host, Bernard Boo, coming to you from the Bay Area in California, and joining me from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, is Way Too Indie's very own dastardly dissenter, CJ Prince. What's up, CJ?
Not much. Having fun.
Okay, all right, there we go.
I'm so enthusiastic, I'm sorry.
Yeah, high energy again.
I know, yeah.
And as I mentioned, we've got filmmaker Perry Blackshear joining us from New York City. What's up, Perry?
Hi, great to be here, guys.
It's good to hear from you. I've spoken to you before about your movie, They Look Like People, which CJ and I are huge fans of. So it's going to be great to talk about your movie again and tell people to go see it.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna be talking about They Look Like People in a little bit here, but to start off, as always, we're gonna share our indie picks of the week. So as always, our guest is gonna kick us off. Perry, what is your indie pick of the week?
So mine is a small film called It's Such a Beautiful Day by Don Hertzfeldt. It's an animated movie, and it's not really a horror film, but it certainly scared me more than most films I've watched. And many people might be familiar with his work from Rejected or some of the other stuff he did, but this is a feature film, and it's about a guy who sort of slowly loses his mind. And I don't want to say much more than that, but it is so beautiful and sad and frightening, and is everything I love about movies and what I think a movie should be, which is sort of an experience that you'll hopefully never forget. And you can watch it on Netflix, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really great, and he's one of kind of like the rock star of the animation world. It's really great work from him, and gosh, we dodged a bullet there because that was an inch away from being my indie pick of the week.
Really?
I was so close to picking that one. I changed my mind literally today. I changed my mind, so we dodged a bullet. But before we get to mine, I'll let CJ go first. What's your indie pick of the week, CJ?
Okay, my indie pick is Christian Petzold's film Phoenix, which just got the must-see indie badge on the site,
Nice.
And for good reason. This is his follow-up to what I think is his masterpiece called Barbara. Phoenix takes place just after World War II, and it focuses on Nellie, who's played by Petzold's muse, Nina Haas. She gets facial reconstruction surgery after surviving at a concentration camp, yet she stubbornly kind of clings on to the past. She's offered she could get a brand new face. She wants to look exactly like she did before, although she only looks slightly like she did before. And then she finds out that her husband, before the war, is still alive. She hunts him down. He doesn't recognize her because she doesn't look like his wife anymore, but he says, "Hey, you look enough like my wife that you could pretend to be her. Her family has a massive fortune, and I think they're all dead. Do you want to pretend to be my wife so we can split the fortune?" and she goes, "Sure," because she wants to be with her husband. Although there's also the theory, her friend suggests that maybe he was the one that kind of ratted her out to the Nazis and got her captured in the first place. So if you can't tell, it's a pretty twisty film psychologically.
Wow.
It's not one of my absolute favorites of the year, but it's just a damn good film, and it's the kind of straight up drama that I don't really see being made anymore. And Christian Petzold is just a total master director, and everything he does in this movie is just pure class. And Nina Haas gives just one of the best performances I've seen all year as Nellie. And I have to mention this every time I bring up Phoenix, but it has, I think, one of the best endings to a film I've seen in forever.
Wow.
People say that this movie is it's okay going up, but once it gets to that final scene, I saw it at the Toronto Film Fest last year, and it's the air just got sucked out of the room because it just pulls you in so hard. And I watched it every time I watch that ending because it's on YouTube and I do go watch it sometimes. I had to when I was doing. I have an interview with the director Christian Petzold on the site that just got recently put up again. But I was watching the ending and like every time I just get like chills watching that ending because it's so insanely powerful. So at least don't miss this movie just for the fact that you missed out on experiencing a kind of incredible sequence like that. But go watch Phoenix. It's just a really amazing drama. IFC Films is releasing it. It's in limited release now, and I think it's going to eventually find its way to VOD.
My pick for the week is not a recent film. It's from 2011, and it's Pina, the dance documentary about modern dance choreographer Pina Bausch, and it's directed by Wim Wenders. And the interesting thing about this film is it was going to be a documentary about Pina and her career, kind of examining her work, but she unexpectedly died during the preparation for this documentary, and Wim Wenders was getting ready to kind of call off the project, but Pina students insisted that they continue and make the movie. So what results is this documentary with beautiful performances that were written by Pina and choreographed by Pina, performed by her students, but it's done in a way that's kind of a tribute to these dancers' mentor and friend. So it's just a really breathtaking movie, and it's so emotional because I think watching these dances would have been emotional and amazing already, but because they're doing it for their lost friend, it kills me. I love this movie. It's one of my favorite documentaries in recent memory. It's available on the Criterion Collection. They've released it. And you guys should all go check that out. I think it's available on Hulu as a part of the Criterion Collection, and it's one of my favorites. One of my favorites in recent memory. But those are our indie picks of the week. It's Such a Beautiful Day, Phoenix, and Pina. Guys, go check those out. Let us know what you think of them. But now we're going to talk about another movie that would definitely be deserving of our indie pick of the week. They Look Like People. Perry, tell people about your movie.
Okay, so They Look Like People is a story about love and nightmares, and it's about two friends, one of whom thinks people around him are turning into evil monsters, and he has to struggle with figuring out whether he should protect his friend from what he thinks is sort of an oncoming war, or from himself because he's becoming very dangerous. It's been called a psycho bromance. I don't know if that's quite accurate. You guys maybe can tell me. It's a little bit of a horror movie with people have mentioned Donnie Darko and Take Shelter as well as references.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to sound comparative or stuff, but I watched and I was like blown away, and then I was like upset because I'm just like, people are praising, horror is having this kind of, it's like, oh, it's having its little renaissance again, and you got these films like It Follows and The Babadook and Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and I'm just like, why isn't this movie being, put up there? Why don't you have, like a Radius or IFC or someone, scooping this up and trying to get it out for people to see? Because I just think that this is something people should watch. And I mean, for me, it's definitely very unsettling and creepy. And it gave me like a Take Shelter / like an Invasion of the Body Snatchers vibe. And what I liked about though was that it's really like I didn't expect it to be so resonant, I guess maybe thematically, like because it deals with like I love the way you set it up with Wyatt and Christian, why it's kind of running away from conformity and his impending marriage and all that, whereas Christian is kind of desperately wanting to fit in, and how the two kind of merge together and wind up coming together over that. And it's just this really fascinating arc, and you deal with like just the themes of like maybe for me just personally speaking on it, deals with these kinds of ideas of like when you're getting when you're getting older, and it's kind of like that idea of identity, and it's hard to really carve out your own little unique quality, I guess. And the film to me touched on that, and it really just resonated with me. So yeah, I was a huge fan, and it really blew me away.
Oh, well, thanks, man. I'm glad you guys liked it.
Yeah, we loved it. And well, tell us a little bit about the inception of this movie and how you got the idea. I think it's pretty novel.
Yeah, so I a few years ago, a really good friend of mine was going through a really tough time, and told me afterwards that he started to think, everybody around him was evil and that people were sending him messages or stealing his, stuff on his computer. And he had just had a big slew of bad things happen to him, some family stuff, lost his girlfriend, lost his job, a lot of other stuff. And when I went through a really bad time myself, I sort of started to see what he meant when I was, feeling really bad. It seemed like everyone was kind of out to get you, and that the world was this evil place where just people on the street were your enemy and everyone was your enemy. And that sort of formed the basis of the movie. What allowed us to make it was the group of actors that I worked with on the movie, who are old friends, who have been bugging me to make a movie forever. And finally what I did was I bought them plane tickets from LA 4 months in advance and carved out a month that we were going to make this movie, and we didn't even have a script yet, but we were like, we're going to do it. And that was really sort of a terrible idea, because I ended up writing the script in about a month right before we shot, which was, I do not recommend. But I think one thing that happened with that is because the crew was so small and I was such good friends with the people that we originally planned it to be a little bit more just of a genre fun kind of movie, like what we'd want to see on Netflix if we were just browsing,
Yeah.
But just because we were so close to it and so close to each other, and the set was so intimate, that it ended up becoming the most personal film I ever made, which is kind of weird for a little bit of a scary movie. But a lot of us came out in the characters and the situations, and that's my apartment that we're shooting in.
Great.
And yeah, exactly. Some of the actors are like wearing my clothes, which is a little bit embarrassing. But it ended up becoming really personal, and just in addition to about those sort of bad times in your life, about opening yourself up to hurt. It's really hard, especially when you're low, but that's sort of being the only way to live. And also about, becoming older and facing failure and facing a life that you thought your life was going to be one way and it ended up being another. So we didn't realize how much was in there until we finished it. And we're like, oh, wow, this is almost embarrassing how intimate this is, how personal this is. Yeah. So I'm glad. I think people like the scary stuff, but I think the touring with the film and all these festivals has been wonderful. And I think that's what people want to talk to us the most about, is the personal stuff.
Yeah, and the stars, Evan Demoshel and McLeod Andrews, they're just so great. They're your buddies, and I got to speak to all three of you a few months ago in San Francisco, and it was a lot of fun talking to you guys. I could tell you guys are really good friends. I was glad to hear that before we started recording, you told me you guys were making another movie.
Oh, yeah. So, well, we're keeping it secret now, just in case. We're waiting on a few things for it to all kind of work out.
Should I cut this out?
No. We can talk about it. I won't mention what it's about, but it's with the same crew. It's the same kind of like horror movie with a lot of heart and soul space. And we're really excited about it. And it's exciting that, making a movie like that with people is sort of like being in a relationship with 4 people at the same time. And then you're doing it long distance because they're in LA. And the fact that we've managed to preserve that and work together again without killing each other, because making a movie is very stressful, is really great. And, a lot of the filmmakers I admire work with the same people and have sort of found their people. And I'm really excited to be able to do that with some friends of mine.
That's very exciting. I remember talking to you guys and telling you I hoped that you guys would stick together and keep that approach, that kind of bromance approach to movie making. Where are you guys headed on your festival tour now? What's coming up for you?
So we're in Fantasia, which we're extremely excited about because it's our first genre festival, and it'll be our international premiere. And that's in Montreal this upcoming weekend on August 2nd and August 3rd. And I'll be up there, and some of the actors will be, and we're really excited about it.
Fantastic. And is there something on the horizon, a way for fans to find your film elsewhere, perhaps online?
That is in the works. We're selecting what we want to do with that. But if you guys are in Hollywood, it's also screening at the ArcLight on August 9th.
No shit.
Yeah, one special screening through the ArcLight, which we're really pumped about.
Awesome. I love the ArcLight. You can pick
Cool.
your seats.
Yeah.
But they look like people. We are highly recommending this movie. Everybody go check it out. And before we, in honor of They Look Like People, before we get into talking about our favorite bloodless horror scenes, we've got to mention our wonderful sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Mubi, a curated online cinema that brings its members a hand-picked selection of the best independent, international, and classic films. Every day, Mubi's curators introduce a new title, and you have 30 days to watch it. That means there are always 30 wonderful films to enjoy, all for only $4.99 a month. That's cheap as hell. Plus, when you use their mobile apps, you can download films to watch offline, which is one of my favorite features of the whole Mubi shebang-a-bang. Mubi is your passport to the world of cinema, and it's available all over the world in over 200 countries. There are a lot of great films that are playing right now on Mubi that you can watch. CJ, let us know what one of them is right now.
One of them is one of my personal favorites from 2010. It's, I'm going to try and pronounce this, A Feature Upon Weerasethakul's Uncle Boonmee Who Can Recall His Past Lives. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It is unlike anything you'll see. I mean, people have described this as being a movie that's like it came from an alien planet. It just is so off the wall, and it's one of the few movies where I feel it exists in this kind of realm between like life and death, because it's all about transitioning to the afterlife, and it's a really spiritual film and filled with so many amazing sequences. If you haven't seen that movie, I really suggest you watch it as soon as you can, because it is, in my eyes, really essential viewing. And you can watch it on Mubi, and not only that, but when you're done, they have like 29 other movies you can watch too.
Yeah, that's a great one over there on Mubi. Also playing is Bong Joon-ho's debut, Barking Dogs Never Bite. It's from the South Korean director, of course, who directed Snowpiercer and The Host. He's etched out like quite the filmography since this 2000 black comedy starring Doona Bae, but his debut is 100% worth revisiting and discovering for the first time. It's available on Mubi, and if you don't have Mubi, shame on you. They're a wonderful service, a wonderful sponsor, and it would really help us out if you guys would go check them out and go to Mubi.com. That's MUBI.com/Way2Indie. Way Too Indie listeners can get Mubi for free for a month. Go check it out. It'll help us out. It'll help them out, and you'll be happy as well. Okay, now we're going to be talking about our favorite bloodless horror scenes. I think a lot is being made these days of, fun, kind of gory torture porn horror movies, which I enjoy quite a bit. But I think you can make a scene really scary without all that all that craziness. I know, Perry, you guys do a great job of that, and They Look Like People. It's a really scary movie that is pretty tame as far as gore is concerned. There's a long running tradition of filmmakers scaring audiences with through other means, like through music or editing or pacing or atmosphere. And I think we're going to explore some of our favorite examples of that, some of our favorite scenes. So, Perry, we're going to start with you. We're going to let you start because you're the guest and you're awesome.
Well, there's so many movies that I took inspiration from that do this really well, but I want to highlight one that a lot of people haven't heard of called Absentia, which is Mike Flanagan's first film. He went on to do Oculus. And it's a tiny budget movie about two sisters, and one of the sisters' husbands has been missing for 7 years, and he's been haunting her, and she's about to declare him kind of dead so she can get their marriage annulled, and he starts haunting her. But there's a lot of scenes in that there you don't see anything, but I was just freaking out. And my favorite one that I'll shout out to, because it's early on, is just a scene where someone's brushing their teeth and the curtain of the bathtub is closed behind them, and it's just a curtain in a room, and you don't know what's behind it, and it scared the hell out of me. And he does it so well, and it really shows how scary you can make something with just being really conscious of what people are thinking when, and I thought that was tremendous.
Yeah, I still have yet to check that out. CJ, what do you got for us?
Well, it's funny because I was actually originally going to pick Absentia because I'm a huge Mike
Really? Oh
Flanagan
my God,
fan.
it's so good.
It's
So
so
good.
good. And I think Mike Flanagan's like one of my favorite horror directors right now. I love Absentia, I love Oculus, and I feel like he gets not nearly the amount of respect he deserves because he makes some freaky ass movies. But anyway, my pick, which is I hate to pick it's I don't even think it's available in North America because I saw it at a festival a long time ago, but it's kind of become one of my favorite horror films now. It's a movie by this director from Austria named Jessica Hausner called Hotel. Um, some of you might recognize her because she has some recent films called Lourdes and Amour Fou that had a bit of popularity, but this is from 2004. It doesn't have any blood in it whatsoever. It's all about mood and atmosphere and ambiguity. It's about a young woman who gets a new job at a secluded rural hotel because her previous worker just vanished without a trace. And so you have the cops are still kind of poking around the hotel investigating her disappearance. All the hotel workers are treating this girl like she's an outcast. And there's also this talk of some sort of, folklore legend about like a witch that kind of lives in the woods surrounding this hotel. So I've never seen a horror film that just stubbornly walks this line of ambiguity. There's everything in this film that happens that could be creepy or supernatural where it can easily be explained as something perfectly rational. And I think that's its greatest strength. It never shows its cards ever. You're completely left in the dark as to what exactly is going on, and that makes it more scary. And I think it makes it more relatable too, because the way I talk, I think it's a total masterpiece because for me, it's a film that's all about the irrationality of fear and how we kind of let our imagination, like connect the dots and come up with these ideas and these horrible things in our head. I tell people it's a film that's kind of like capturing the feeling of when you go into like a dark basement at night and you're kind of wondering, what might be in the dark behind there. That movie's entirely about capturing that feeling, and it nails it just dead on.
Hey guys, you know what just
Hey.
happened recently?
What?
Criterion announced that they are putting out my favorite movie of all time as a disc. David Lynch's 2001 movie Mulholland Drive. I can't contain my excitement for this Criterion Collection release. It is my favorite movie. I don't think that'll ever change. And I wanted to give it a shout out because I always want to give it a shout out every episode, but that's not possible because that would be ridiculous. But I think it was appropriate this time because there are so many terrifying scenes in this movie, although it's not considered a horror movie per se. There's so many scary scenes, but the one I think that people latch onto the most is this dream sequence behind a diner where the characters who are having a dream come across a creature or some type of this person who appears from behind a dumpster and kind of is covered in garbage or whatever. And it sounds so silly on paper, but in practice in the movie when you see it, it's really, really terrifying. I think people remember that a lot because it's a jump scare, but it's not really a jump scare because you kind of see it coming from a mile away. But Lynch is just so good with his camera and so good with his editing and everything that it is still completely terrifying. And the interesting thing about that shot is that a lot of people actually call the creature like the dumpster man or something, but it's actually a woman who's playing the creature. But yeah, most people think it's a man, but it's actually a woman who's playing them. So I feel bad for her, but she is covered in garbage, so I guess that helps her case a little bit. But yeah, Mulholland Drive, can't wait to buy 10 copies of that on Blu-ray when it comes out.
You're just gonna hand it out to people on the street?
I'm not lying. Like, I'm telling the truth. I'm gonna buy a bunch of copies and I'm gonna hand them out to people.
Or are you just gonna hoard them for yourself?
I'm 10. Gonna keep 2. I'm gonna keep 2.
Keep 2, just a backup. Just
I need a backup.
No, I mean, we could talk about Lynch this whole time because Lynch is kind of a master.
I was gonna bring up Eraserhead. I can't even watch that movie anymore. It's like being in a nonstop anxiety dream. I just have panic attacks. Like the scene where he's in bed with the woman and throwing those, and he finds those worm things in the bed, those like sperm like things, and just starts throwing them out, and it's like his wet hands. I just have like, I need to like turn the computer off. It's too much. It's like being in a nightmare. It's really, really freaks me out.
I point to Lost Highway, the scene with Robert Blake, which kind of just curdles my blood every time, and especially because it's, you know, freaking Robert Blake.
Underrated movie, I think.
Hugely underrated, and I love that David Lynch describes that movie as a Mobius strip, because it's so dead on, of course. But I want to bring up Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cairo or Pulse, because that's one of the straight up scariest movies I've ever seen. And there's a scene where a guy goes into a room that's clearly labeled the Forbidden Room, but because it's a horror movie, he has to go inside. And then, like, just the most long, drawn out yet horrifying scene. One of the most horrifying things he's ever seen happens, where this ghost just kind of slowly walks towards him. The camera doesn't like cut away. Like it's this weird scene because I'm so used to kind of like the economy of horror and how everything is all about speediness and you know, like quick stuff, and this one just stays on it, and it's like you just want to close your eyes watching it, but you don't want to open it again because you're kind of afraid of what'll be there. It's absolutely terrifying.
Oh, that's wonderful. I have to mention William Castle's 1959 horror classic House on Haunted Hill. This movie, I think this was the first time I was scared shitless watching a movie. It's not scary. I will say it's not as scary watching that movie now, but there's a scene in that movie where the two characters are walking, you know, through the darkly lit house, the the titular house on a haunted hill, and they're walking through these dark corridors. It's like classic horror movie stuff, and this girl's holding a candle, and she turns around, and there's this like old hag just standing. The old hag, okay, so she sees this old hag who has like white eyes and is really scary looking. But the funny thing about, you can find this on YouTube, just YouTube a House on Haunted Hill scene. And the funny thing is that the old hag isn't even like facing her. Like the old hag is like looking off somewhere else, almost like, you know. It's just really funny. I watched on YouTube. I can't believe I was so scared by this when I was a kid. But yeah, I remember watching that scene when I was a kid and just not wanting to fall asleep ever again.
I feel like with you mentioning this, you know, garbage covered woman in Mulholland Drive and this old hag that you have, there's a little, I can sense a trend of
I got a thing.
Women, women, old decrepit women terrify you.
A little bit. But yeah, hey, let's keep that going. Psycho.
I mean, I guess
it's like the classic Psycho's full of blood.
No, but the scene I'm talking about is not.
Oh, okay.
When we find out the truth about Norman Bates' mother.
Oh yeah. Oh jeez.
that is terrifying. Bad. There's the great shot of the light, the hanging light that's going back and forth and creates a great effect.
That I remember that freaking me out.
Yeah.
A lot. I recently saw a movie called Tale of Two Sisters, and there's something called fridge horror. Do you guys know this term?
No.
It's like a TV tropes term. It basically just means that like it's the horror that you feel when you've been in a room and then you leave the house and you realize that the demon was there the whole time but you didn't see it because someone told you, or like that, you know, that I don't know. It's like the horror after the fact that happens. And there's a scene in Tale of Two Sisters that still freaks me out, where this woman is having basically a seizure and she keeps staring at this dark area underneath the sink and pointing at it and sort of screaming silently. It's a really messed up scene, but you just keep staring at this dark, empty closet, and then later there's a flash of what's actually in there. And it just, oh my God, it's a different kind of, it's like not that shock horror, it's that weird dread that kind of starts at your throat and just sinks into your body.
Yeah.
Kind of stays there. It kind of is like a slow feeling.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep that thing going, and also my old woman thing going again. I didn't know that this pattern existed before.
This is good. This is like psychotherapy.
Yeah.
But I'm going to bring up Bong Joon-ho again. His 2009 film Mother.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh God. I think I might know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Ha-ja Kim plays the titular mother, and she's kind of searching for this killer who framed her son for a girl's death. And I'm talking about the final shot of the movie, where, gosh, I don't know how to not spoil this, but spoiler alert. well, I guess this isn't a spoiler, but she has these. She does this thing where she can prick someone with this needle or stick this needle somewhere in their body, and they kind of forget. They lose their memory almost, and they're in this state of ecstasy a little bit. And at the end of the movie, Hae-ja Kim's character pricks herself and is on this train, and you just from outside the train, there's a shot of her kind of dancing. This really terrifying. I don't know why it's so scary, but she's just dancing in ecstasy as she's forgotten all these horrors she's experienced over the past, however long with her son and this terrible murder story. And I thought that's one of the most chilling shots I've ever seen in any movie. Creeped me out.
Yeah.
It's really funny, Perry. You mentioned TL2. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. No. I'm not kidding you because I actually wrote down on my notes. I wrote down that exact scene from Tale of Two Sisters.
Really? Oh my God! And Absentia, man. We should. This makes me really. I wrote down Hotel, Pulse, and Uncle Bon because I've heard about Uncle Bon Me before or Boon Me before. Yeah. So I'm gonna watch these now because obviously we share some sort of. Yeah.
Yes, linkage on that front. Yeah, it's like that. That's crazy. I mean, in terms of classics, I guess I can point to I'm keep thinking of Asian horror, but I feel like they're so good at it.
We're the best.
One of the best, like seriously. But I lost my pick, but I'm just gonna go with the Ringu because I mean that.
Oh man, yep.
I watched a little bit of it recently. It was on TV. And I just had to I stopped watching after a bit because I was like, this movie is so dreadful. Well, it was just so imposing and so dreadful. I was like, it's making me so uncomfortable. I was like, I'm not in the mood to watch this right now.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
No, there's so many great picks. Before we wrap up, I just want to rattle off a few others. The Blair Witch Project. At the end where you see that guy just kind of standing there staring at a wall. I think that's a pretty great one. Pinocchio, with that kind of trippy psychedelic scene where everyone's
oh my God
donkeys.
The yes
yeah.
The one where he goes mama and it's a silhouette. Oh my God, that really gave me nightmares for years.
Terrifying, and similarly terrifying, the boat tunnel scene in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That's a classic one that I think a lot of people mention when they talk about bloodless horror scenes. But guys, let us know what your favorite bloodless horror scenes are. I think to make these kind of scenes work, it takes a lot of skill from its filmmaker and its actors. And Perry, I think you accomplished that with your film, so good on you. We love your film, and we loved having you on the show today.
Well, thanks, guys. It was a real pleasure.
All right, guys, that was a lot of fun, and now we're going to leap straight from They Look Like People into The Look of Silence. Joshua Oppenheimer's critically acclaimed, mesmerizing 2013 documentary The Act of Killing focuses on the perpetrators of the Indonesian killings of 1965 and 66, in which over 1 million people associated with the communist community were violently murdered. Oppenheimer interviews the perpetrators in the present day as they reenact disturbing recollections from the genocide by staging movie scenes of their own. Oppenheimer's new documentary, The Look of Silence, is a companion piece to The Act of Killing and follows a family of the genocide survivors, specifically an optometrist named Adi, who confronts face-to-face, on camera, some of the perpetrators who murdered his own brother. The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence have caused a major stir both in the film community and in Indonesia. The Act of Killing wasn't received well by the Indonesian government, unsurprisingly, but the two films have helped open up a conversation in the country in which the government, the murderers, and the victims' families will hopefully begin to come to terms with the truth about the genocide and reckon with the damage it's done. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Mr. Oppenheimer about The Look of Silence. Well, I want to thank you so much again for taking the time. This movie... something that caught my ear when I was researching you and researching what you've been talking about with these two movies is that you describe both of them as cinema as intervention, which I thought was very interesting.
Cinema by holding up a mirror, inviting viewers, seducing viewers, forcing viewers to confront the most difficult, mysterious, painful aspects of who we are, inevitably forces a confrontation with things we already know about ourselves yet are too afraid normally to acknowledge. So there's a kind of shock of the familiar, not a shock of the new. It's like when you look in the mirror after a particularly bad night and you think, oh no, is that me?
Wow.
And of course that makes it impossible to carry on as before. If you've lived your life on the basis of not addressing or not thinking about your most important problems and consequently not addressing them, once you're forced to acknowledge them, then you have to address them. And it's precisely an intervention, therefore, in cognitive dissonance, identical to that of the child in The Emperor's New Clothes, who comes in and says, look, the king is naked. Everybody knew it, but had been too afraid to say it. Once it's said, everything has to change.
And has a wider national conversation in Indonesia opened up since the first film?
Yes, absolutely. And the act of killing, you could say, helped to catalyze a fundamental transformation in how Indonesia talks about its past. The mainstream media, before the film, with very few exceptions, was silent about what happened or else celebrated the extermination of the Indonesian left. Now the media talks about the genocide as a genocide and talks about the terrible regime of corruption and violence and, of course, fear that the perpetrators have built. Into that space opened by the act of killing came The Look of Silence, receiving, at least at the beginning, a much wider release than the act of killing had.
Oh, wow.
The act of killing began its life in secret. The Look of Silence is distributed, by contrast, by two government bodies, the National Human Rights Commission and the Jakarta Arts Council. The first screening was held in Indonesia's largest theater, a venue for 1,500 people. 3,000 people turned up because billboards were put up around Jakarta announcing the screening. They put on a second screening so everyone could watch the film. Adi came as a surprise guest to both screenings, and after each screening received a 15-minute standing ovation. A month later, the film came out around Indonesia. There were 500 public screenings on the first day. Eventually, we've reached somewhere over 3,500 screenings, and there's new screenings all the time. You could say that if the first film made people acknowledge what happened and the terrible consequences of that, the second film makes people acknowledge the very personal, intimate prison of fear in which every Indonesian's been sort of condemned to live and raise their children, and forces any Indonesian really who sees the film to support truth, reconciliation, and justice. The national conversation demanding truth and reconciliation has in part prompted the government to introduce a truth and reconciliation bill, woefully inadequate though it still is, but an important first step.
Wow, and that's had to be the ultimate goal, is to start this conversation.
Well, it was when I began my work on this issue, it was because I was trying to teach plantation workers how to make their own film about their effort to organize a union. Unions had been illegal under the military dictatorship, and the Belgian plantation company where they were working was making the women, gave the women the supposedly lighter job of spraying the pesticides and the herbicides, but with no protective clothing. And one of the herbicides was so toxic that the mist would go into their lungs, then reach their livers and dissolve the fabric of their liver tissue, and the women would die of liver failure in their 40s. And rather than listen to the workers' demands that they should be given protective clothing, the Belgian company hired paramilitaries, thugs and gangsters to threaten and attack the workers, who then dropped their demands immediately because they said, explaining to me that their parents and grandparents had been killed as part of a mass killing in 1965, that they were members of the National Plantation Workers Union, and simply because of that, they were seen as likely opponents to the new military dictatorship, and they were killed. And there was a sense that this could happen again, because this paramilitary group that the company hired is still powerful and was the main group to carry out the killings with the army in that region. So I realized what was killing my friends was not just poison, but also fear.
Wow.
So they first asked me, after they finished making their film about their organizing of the union, a film called The Globalization Tapes, they said, now why don't you come back and make a film about why we are still afraid? And so already to expose the mechanisms of fear is to intervene. And then shortly after we began, actually, I began that process with Adi Rukun, the main character in The Look of Silence, and his parents. They started gathering survivors to tell me their stories, and within 3 weeks, the army threatened the survivors not to participate in the film, at which point Adi called me to a secret meeting at midnight in his parents' home with some of the survivors, and they said, "Don't give up, try to film the perpetrators." Well, I was afraid to do that at first, thinking that it would be dangerous to get them to talk. Yeah. I overcame that fear. I approached them and found that they were open, that it took nothing to win their trust, at least not enough trust for them to talk about what they'd done. They were boastful about what they'd done. Adi, of course, wanted to see the footage that he'd sent me to film with the perpetrators, and when he saw it, he and then the other survivors and ultimately the whole Indonesian human rights community really said, continue to film the perpetrators, because anyone who hears this, sees the way they're speaking, will be forced to acknowledge this thing that everyone knows but doesn't want to admit, which is that because the perpetrators are still in power, the genocide in an important way has never ended, because people's lives are still being destroyed by fear. So from the beginning, the mission of that I felt tasked with by the survivors of filming the perpetrators was intended as a kind of intervention. And then when Adi said he wanted to confront the perpetrators in the hope that he would be able to reconcile his family with the perpetrators' families so that his children could grow up without fear, he was proposing a different, healing kind of intervention. And I told him, I don't think the perpetrators will apologize in the way you hope. And in that sense, will fail to reconcile your family with your family's neighbors. But if I can show why we fail with precision and intimacy and empathy, we can reveal through the film how torn the social fabric of Indonesia is, how urgently truth, reconciliation, and justice are needed. We can make anyone who sees the film support truth and reconciliation. And in that sense, through the film as a whole, we might succeed where we fail in a much bigger way, where we fail in these individual confrontations. Again, it's an intervention.
Wow. So, okay, so the first film, of course, made quite a big splash. People were incredibly moved by it, the world pretty much. What is the biggest, if there is one, what's the biggest misconception about that film?
I think that the misconceptions as they've been articulated, and I hope this doesn't sound offensive, I don't mean it to, I really understand it. But as you can see, maybe from the films, I'm always trying to imagine how people feel. I mean, that's just how I am. That's the basis for the kind of work I do. The biggest misconception about the film that's maybe disingenuous, the biggest false claim made about the film, is that it somehow is giving the perpetrators a stage upon which to glorify themselves. Well, no one who's seen these films thinks the perpetrators look glorious in any way. No one comes away thinking that they're heroic. And I think that's actually a disingenuous articulation of something people are uncomfortable acknowledging.
Interesting.
Which is that they're not comfortable with the basic premise of the film that the perpetrators are human. Because to acknowledge that would be to shed that protective skin, that armor, whereby we, namely the escapist fantasy that we are somehow fundamentally different from the perpetrators, that we can therefore look down upon them and say, they're monsters, they have nothing to do with me. I would never do that. And while I would respond in two ways, I would first of all say that I understand the fear. Of course, if any of us would hope that if we grew up in their families in that time, we would hope that we would make different decisions come 1965. But we know that we're very lucky never to have to find out. And I would also say that once we overcome that fear of seeing that we are similar, that the perpetrators are human beings like us, we quickly recognize this is the only hopeful way of understanding atrocity. Because if the perpetrators are human, then we ought to be able to find ways of living together where we encourage people to practice the widest possible empathy. And we encourage children to doubt what authority and what the state and what their teachers teach them. Or we teach doubt, we teach skepticism, so that it becomes more difficult to incite people to participate in state-sanctioned violence that betrays their individual morality. And if we can do that, then we ought to find ways of living together where this kind of unthinkable violence really becomes one day unimaginable. And I think there's a number of other misconceptions which are easily which are innocent enough. One is that the film is about what happened in 1965. Well, neither of my films are about 1965. Neither film is a historical documentary. The Act of Killing is actually, both are about present day and complementary aspects of impunity. The Act of Killing is about the present day lies, fantasies, stories that the perpetrators tell themselves so that they can live with themselves, and the terrible consequences of that when imposed upon the whole society. It's the Look of Silence is about what is it like to have to live as a survivor today in such a society in the wake of 50 years of fear. And going on a little tangent here, the Act of Killing outside the United States, and maybe most Americans won't know this, it's 40 minutes longer. The uncut, unabridged version of the Act of Killing is 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's available in the United States in pretty much every home video format as the director's cut, including on Netflix. It's the Act of Killing director's cut. And if you see the director's cut of the Act of Killing, you'll perceive I said that these two films explore complementary aspects of impunity today. You'll see a formal complementarity as well. You'll see that the director's cut of The Act of Killing is not really a documentary at all. It's a kind of non-fiction delirium, a kind of non-fiction fever dream, cut through by these abrupt cuts to silence. And these are these cuts to these sort of haunted landscapes that form the very fabric of the Look of Silence. These are moments where the director's cut abruptly shifts perspective from the perpetrators to the absent dead, and whom I hope haunt the entire film. And in The Look of Silence, I've tried to take the viewer and bring you into any one of those haunted silences that punctuate the director's cut of The Act of Killing and make you feel what is it like to live there as a survivor? What is it like to have to rebuild your life in fear and in silence? What grace, what love can you find there? I encourage, if you haven't seen The Act of Killing, or if you've only seen the short version and you like The Act of Killing or found it interesting, I encourage you to see the director's cut. It's a deeper film. It's a gentler film. It's a more human film. And it's not a director's cut at all, really, because director's cuts are, of course, made afterwards and out of regret. This is the original and uncut film. It's what Werner Herzog has called the only legitimate cut of the film. And it's out there for anyone to watch on Netflix or DVD or iTunes or as they wish.
I think your film challenges people in a way. Adi is confronting these perpetrators, but in a way you're also confronting the audience and challenging them to reckon with this. Like I think you've said before, some documentaries allow you to look away. They distract you, or they
offer you a hopeful conclusion that makes it easier to look away from the film after the film ends, because you feel somehow the future is well in hand.
When people I know here in America, like some people I know who see someone who's done an atrocious thing in the news, they speak of them as if they're monsters. You know?
One of the most revealing reviews of The Look of Silence that I don't really read many of them, but this was so great that my partner made me read it. My husband made me read it. He said, it was this great review. I don't know where it came out, but it said that The Look of Silence is boring and unsatisfying because you want Adi to get angry and beat these people up. And it's like... It's just a wonderful, it's so revealing. It's so revealing of the reviewer and the culture that the review is coming from.
All of these confrontations or conversations are terrific, and Adi is, just an amazing person from what we've seen from the film. But there's the conversation with the man who works in legislature, I believe. Yeah. And Adi asks him what it's like to do politics surrounded by his victims, and he takes that as an insult, but I actually thought that was an incredibly almost caring question for him to ask that man. It's
pretty cutting as well. I mean, I love that you see it as caring, but for him, what is it like as to do politics surrounded by the families of the people you slaughtered?
Right.
What a question. And the man's response is also wonderful because he has a pretty arrogant tone, at least when talking to Adi. And he says, I'm not arrogant. I go and I visit them. They like me. If they didn't like me, they wouldn't keep electing me. And Adi then asks the follow-up question, well, don't you just intimidate them into voting for you. And then he says defensively, reflexively, no, of course not. But we can see in his very bearing the fact that just seconds later he will try and intimidate Adi.
Yes.
That of course he's lying. But Adi comes to the perpetrators in general. I mean, the fact that you see that as carrying is of course, because Adi does come to the perpetrators and looks at them as human beings.
He's giving them a chance.
He's saying he comes to them with this silent, caring look, as though empathetic look.
Right.
If you can acknowledge what you've done is wrong, then we can forgive and we can move on. And Adi, and that actually makes it worse for the perpetrators. I mean, I was listening not too long ago to a recording on the radio of the survivors, the relatives of the victims of the Charleston shooting in June, forgiving the perpetrator. And you have this. I was very moved, first of all, because it reminded me of Adi so much, but also because it is profoundly generous. At the same time, I recognized instantly with a shudder how much harder that makes it for the perpetrator, because the perpetrator now has to see the victim as human. And I think that's happening here. I mean, Adi looks at these men with a humanizing gaze. They're forced to return his gaze and see him as human. By extension, Romley's human. All of the victims suddenly become human. And all of their illusions, all of their lies, all of their self-deception that allow them to live with themselves shatter. Just like in the director's cut of The Act of Killing, you see Anwar again and again watching, and this is something that distinguishes the director's cut from the shorter versions. He's watching recursively his dramatizations, his performances, and then in response to the emotions that he feels watching, he proposes the next scene. And just as those dramatizations lead to a crisis in Anwar's own self-deception, here too, Adi's gaze, his humanizing gaze, his care, exactly what you called care, leads them into a place of crisis. And you see them panic and start scrambling for new lies. If they can't claim that their victims are monsters, then because Adi's evidently not one, then they can at least claim that the perpetrator, then they can at least claim that they weren't responsible. So they tell this lie: it wasn't me, I wasn't responsible, I had superiors. And they, of course, in their moment of panic, they get angry and they threaten.
That is so fascinating. I have to watch both movies again with this new context. But some documentaries, I think, tend to contaminate the reality of their subjects sometimes with their stylizations. You don't do that, but it also looks great. How do you walk that line?
I first of all am trying to film something very delicate here. And in The Act of Killing, I'm trying to immerse. In The Act of Killing, I'm trying to make each and every one of Anwar's fantasies, dramatizations, so as powerful as I'm able, so that you are moved in the same way Anwar is moved by his own dreams and nightmares, so that we as viewers get lost in the evolving nightmare. It's what allows the director's cut of The Act of Killing to be a kind of fever dream. And in The Look of Silence, I'm trying to film and that of course, before I go to The Look of Silence, that of course entails trying to create a work of aesthetic force that transports you into the present day delirium of the perpetrators, and so that you can actually feel the moral vacuum that makes inevitable for this whole society, given that is the cultural regime here, because the perpetrators are in power. In The Look of Silence, I'm trying to film something very delicate, and I had the title The Look of Silence long before I had even the title The Act of Killing.
Interesting.
It defines a project trying to show what silence looks like, and I'm trying to show two things. I'm trying to show the shame and the fear and the traces on the faces of Adi's parents, and their rhythm of their speech, and in the kind of rhythm of their breathing and the silences. I'm trying to show the traces of a life lived in fear. And I'm also trying to show in the landscapes in which the film takes place the kind of the presence of ghosts. I'm trying to use the camera to kind of conjure and make visible the ghosts of the dead who have maybe been grieved but never mourned because they weren't even buried, their murders not even confirmed to their loved ones. Wow. So I'm trying to, and in trying to do that, one is trying to create, first of all, an enchanted landscape, because it's a haunted landscape. Maybe I've thought this before, that maybe magical realism is the only strategy for addressing the unmourned death and unresolved trauma that is inevitable with impunity. And I'm also I need to be very visually precise to render something so subtle, to depict something so subtle as silence. And I'm being careful, and I'm trying to dignify the lives lived and in the spaces that I'm filming and changed by the filming. And I'm trying to film them with a precision. I studied some of the most precise filmmakers I know in preparation for making The Look of Silence, especially Robert Bresson for rendering silence. I'm trying to film people and edit the material with a precision that allows me to focus on these subtleties, so that one seeing the film, even if they don't have words to describe what the film is about, they know in their hearts that it's not a historical film about what happened in 1965. It's not merely a political film about coexistence between survivors and perpetrators. It is also ultimately a poem about memory and oblivion, and about all composed in memoriam to all that's destroyed.
Thank you so much for the time. This was a pleasure. Thank you. Wow, what a fascinating conversation with Joshua Oppenheimer. I'd like to thank him for joining the show. You can follow him on Twitter at Joshua Oppenheim. That's without the ER. And please go check out The Look of Silence. That's an incredibly moving film. I'd also like to urge you to go watch They Look Like People. Thank you to Perry Blackshear for coming on the show. I hope his movie makes some waves here, because it deserves to. And thanks to CJ for joining the show as well. You can follow CJ on Twitter at CJ_Prin. You can follow me at BJ_Boo. And of course, follow Way Too Indie at Way Too Indie. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Spotify and Instagram and YouTube. And you can subscribe to this very podcast on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. We'd very much appreciate it if you could subscribe to us on there and give us a like, maybe. That would be great and help us out. And also help out Mubi as well. They're a great sponsor. Guys, it was fun. We'll see you next week.